Hey everyone, I'd like to welcome you all to my very first podcast about comic books and how they communicate culture. My name is William Franco, and in today's episode, we will be talking about sources and how sources back up your claims and research questions. I will be discussing three sources, and those three sources will be based on my research question, which is how do comic books communicate culture ideas? The first source that we're going to go over is a journal article by Scott Thompson Smith, which discusses how poorly Magneto, Eric Lemter, Jewish heritage has been represented and discussed in comics. This source analyzes how comic portrays Jewish characters and how they never gave Magneto a proper backstory. They never actually delve into his heritage or make him an explicit Jewish character. It also talks about how many Jewish characters have just been implied, never actually being called a Jewish character or a Jew. This source talks about how Marvel and many writers tried to give Magneto a new identity. They tried to rewrite his heritage and culture, as Smith says, but does so by overriding Jewish with mutant and ultimately retreating from history. So they decided that a fictional identity was more important and relevant to a character than a real culture and heritage, like being a Jewish character. This source is very helpful to my research because it provides an opposing view to mine in this research topic. My second source is a book chapter by James Scorser. This source discusses how comics have affected Latin America. It talks about how they created their own comic book communities in Latin America and how comics have highlighted social inequalities and injustices. This source talks about a great deal of things, but the most relevant to my topic is how they represent and affect Latin American communities. So, at the book's heart lies the belief that comics have the potential to cut across diverse readings and consumption groups, to build alliances and format encounters materials and digital between people of different nationalities and from diverse social groups. My last source is a book chapter by Enrique Uribe Youngblood and Daniel A. Aguilar Rodriguez. This source talks about how comics in Colombia and how they affect Colombia throughout the years, how comics have become intertwined with Colombia itself, and how comic consumption has changed over the years. It discusses how little representation Colombia has been getting, and how only four major cities are ever discussed or even mentioned in comics. But it primarily focuses in how comic book consumption in Colombia has changed. As said, the comic book scene in Colombia has thus moved from a public space of streets kiosks to a more private sphere. This chapter is actually very useful because it talks about how comics have become part of the culture while also representing to them, which is a very interesting thing. Now that we discussed what these three sources are mainly about and what they're trying to say, let's talk about the similarities and differences in my sources. One very obvious one would be that my second and last source mainly focus on Latin America and how comics communicate and affect these cultures. So basically, these both comics are talking about Latin America, and they're basically agreeing with my point that they've done a pretty good job at expressing themselves in comics and showing Latin America itself in comics. A major difference between these two articles, though, would be that one focuses on comic books in Latin America as a general, like all of Latin America, while the other one focuses more on the consumption and the effect comics have had in one specific country of Latin America, which is Colombia. Also, my first source is also very different from the rest of them since it provides an opposing view from the other two because it's basically talking about how comics have not properly represented culture and heritage, specifically Jewish heritage, in comics. What we have to take from what I just said was that my first source provides an opposing view and says that comics have not done a good job by representing Jewish heritage and culture. My second source is different from the rest because it says how comics have done a good job at representing communities, and how those communities have like have embraced this and how they've dealt with being finally like represented and how they view themselves. And my third source talks about the consumption and how comics have actually become part of the culture in Colombia. So those are the major differences from all of like how each source differentiates itself. So my opinion on my sources is that I actually really like the sources I chose because they provide different views on comics, and two of my sources provide how it's actually affected those communities that it represents. And I'm gonna say that honestly, my favorite source is the one that has a opposing view from mine. The one that says how comics have done a poor job at representing Jewish heritage. It's my favorite since it talks about how comics sometimes just imply, for whatever reason, they don't want to say why they're part of that culture or even mention that culture, and how we praise them for like being, oh look, we have a Jewish character, but it's never said that that character is Jewish, just very heavily implied. Or when it's said as Jewish, it's put as a background to this fake identity that's not even real. So basically, after all this, what we're getting is that comic books communicate culture ideas. All of my sources can agree on that. Now, whether it's good or bad, that not all of them agreed, but some agreed that it was good, some agreed that it was bad, but they all agreed that they do communicate a culture idea. Or they communicate it very poorly. But okay, so that's gonna be the end of this podcast episode. So I'd like to thank all of you that are still here, if you're here, for tuning in and hearing me out and hearing my question and research and the sources I used for this. So yeah, if you want to follow me on Twitter, it's gonna be at damnliteracy/twitter.com. I'll link it down below if you guys want to follow me. I'll be continuing talking about my research question, which is how do comic books communicate culture ideas. You will find my next project on it probably in like 2 weeks. So yeah, if you want to follow me, it's gonna be down below at damnliteracy/twitter.com. I hope to see you guys next time.